So good morning, everybody. My name is David Weisberg. I'm the CEO of the Federation for Jewish Philanthropy of Upper Fairfield County. And I'm very happy to welcome you to our webinar this morning, which is about fostering family in a fractured world. And I'm delighted to be joined this morning for me, I guess this afternoon, for her by my friend Rabbi Susan Silverman, who's joining us from Israel. Susan, hello. It is so good to see you.
Oh, it is so good to see you. I'm always so happy to see you or read anything you've written.
Oh, God, thank you.
Gives me hope.
It means so much to me. And just, I think a heads up to all of our listeners that we always get on a little early to make sure that everything is working. And we had a moment or two where Susan's internet signal said it was unstable, and why should our internet signals be any different than the rest of the world being a little bit unstable? And so if there's a moment or two that one of us frees up, we're just gonna ride the wave of whatever the internet provides us this morning. So thank you to everyone who's listening for riding it along with us. Susan, thank you for, for connecting with me virtually across the world. I think what we look, and I think part of this conversation is gonna be about how we look for blessings in challenging times. And I think indeed one of the blessings of this challenging time is that it brings us closer together. The irony of having to be separated from everybody is that it actually brings us closer together. And so in our office, we've been talking for a few years about how we have a program with Susan Silverman. And the irony is now that everyone can't be in the same space, everybody can be in the same space. So thank you for being in everybody's living room this morning. I was trying to think this morning of how the two of us met each other. And honestly, I feel like, well, we know each other for a long time. I'm not sure exactly how we met each other. What I do know for certain is that it has to do with this place, this mug that I'm drinking from this morning, which is from Kibbutz Keturah in Israel. And I recall that you and your family were living there probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
When David Lehrer, the director of the Arava Institute, sent me a text saying, Susan Silverman and Yossi Abramowitz are living here and working in our office, and Susan fell in love with our organization and told me that she's going to tell her sisters that they have to do a benefit for you. And that was such a gift to me. And so I'm grateful to Kibbutz Keturah and the Arava Institute for bringing us together.
Oh my God, we left there over 10 years ago. It's crazy.
So it was probably around that time that we first met each other. And I looked at my, I'm drinking one of these wonderful yogi teas this morning in my Kibbutz Keturah mug. And the yogi teas have the little, like a fortune cookie. They have the little writing on the tag. And my little writing today says, love is the ultimate law of life, which it seems to me is going to be very thematic for our conversation today as well. And so as I thought about the conversation that we're going to have over the next hour, I thought in succession, I wanted to talk to you about your family, about this wonderful book called Casting Lots that I just finished reading, about adoption in general, about your nonprofit Second Nurture, and about the state of the world. And what had occurred to me as I was segmenting that, it's all of those things are going to intertwine with each other. And so just like the internet, we're going to ride the wave with those topics as well. And then we'll open it up for questions. But I think in order to understand your story, the first thing we need to know is to understand a little bit about you and the construction of your family, and from your initial vision as a young person of the family that you wanted to have to the family that you've now realized. And so can you introduce a little bit as to, you know, the family you dreamed of as a child and how that's reflected in the family that you have now?
Sure. So I grew up in a family where we had foster kids who lived with us. So we were a foster family for a couple of different girls over a number of years. And I was just, as a little kid, just really taken with the fact that these girls didn't have families of their own, that they were bopping around from place to place, or living in group homes, or living with families, better and worse, you know, over the time that they were separated from their families of origin. And I just knew from when I was little that when I grew up, I was going to adopt, and that was always the plan. And my husband, Yosef, said that I never actually asked him, that I just came home with the paperwork one day and said, I think, yeah, let's just get it started. And he's like, what? Luckily, he was like, all right, let's do it. So we have 5 kids. As I say, we produce girls and import boys. And our girls, bio, and our boys, we adopted both from Ethiopia. And they're now ages 27 down to 17. So they're big. And when our younger son came home, we adopted him when he was 4 years old. And we adopted him, we were living in the States, and moved to kibbutz Keturah from there, and just decided like we needed a couple of years on a kibbutz just for this kid to like adjust to the family without all the normal external pressures of life, you know. And so we did, and we stayed for a few years before we moved to Jerusalem, and it was really kibbutz Keturah. It's like the what do I say? It's the center of the universe in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just a really special place. So.
Right. You talk in your book how you had gotten the paperwork for adoption very early on, before you had any children, and you ended up having 2 children biologically, but you never took that paperwork out of your bag. And
it stayed in my bag.
So there was some strength of faith there, where there was some ongoing commitment among that you would look at that and you would be reminded.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't throw it out. It was just like so deeply part of my identity. I just had to keep it there until I could fulfill that. And so it took a while, you know. So our girls were, I think, 6 and 4 when our son Adar came home as a, you know, almost 1-year-old. He's this little tiny boy, the cutest thing on the planet. And now he's like over 6'2", but.
I'm gonna put up a picture so you can introduce your family to everybody.
Okay, yeah. This is a little bit of an old one, but not so. So, well, left to right, Yosef. That's Adar, that baby. And then Aliza, who's 20. Adar's 21. Aliza is 27. There's Ashira, who's now 17. This was her bat mitzvah, so this was 4 years ago. Our son Zamir, who is now 18. Our daughter Hillel, who's 25. And me.
And you. And talk a little bit, because you talk about it in the book, how your family growing up, and you had your own, you know, kind of, I think every family has its own interesting construction. And the construction of your family, I think, very much influenced the kind of family you wanted to create. So talk a little bit about the construction of your own family and the influences of your various parents growing up.
So my parents separated when I was 14, and re-partnered, and my dad married Janice, who became just like another mom to me, and my mom married John, who's another dad to me. Like, we're just such incredible family, and like parents, and my kids grew up with 8 grandparents, because Yosef's parents are divorced and repartnered, and just with like so much, just an abundance of love. And so I grew up with this family where my sister Jodine came to us through her mom Janice when she married our dad, and she was little. She's just 7. But it doesn't, like, none of us think about it that way unless we are asked and we're talking about it specifically. There we are, the 4 girls. and Janice in the back. So cute. So I grew up with like family not having a definition of biology at all. And I think that people more and more are coming to realize that family is actually not a biological thing, whether it is or isn't, right? Like it'll also be biological, but the essence of it, like what holds us together it's not a DNA thing.
Right. And you know, it also, I think, occurred to me when I was reading your story, how much your family, your sisters, your parents were all part of a community, a support system that helped you have the kind of family that you wanted. And so when we talk more about second nurture, we'll be talking about the idea of having a community of support. And in some ways, it seems like your family was that community of support for you.
Yeah, family is super, super supportive. I mean, the day that Adari came home, it was really probably the best day of my life. Don't tell my other kids, but the day he came home was just the most beautiful day. And all my parents showed up, you know, everybody was there. And my dad looked at this little Adar and he goes, this kid just arrived from halfway around the world. I've never met him before and I would die for him. How is that possible? And that just sort of like summed it up. Like it didn't matter. It just was love. It was just there. It was automatic.
Right. And so just talk a little bit about constructing a blended family so that it feels like something other than a blended family. Or
Growing up or with
the family that you have now, the family that you and Yosef are parents of. And maybe in some ways you wanted to feel like a blended family. In some ways you wanted to just feel like a family. And so, you know, that sense of setting, that sense of oneness that you try to create, you know, is it effort? Is it natural? Is it a struggle?
It has never felt like a struggle any more than just raising kids am I allowed to swear? Is a struggle. It's a
I can't tell you what you can and can't do. So you can do whatever you want.
You know, raising kids is a struggle. I mean, you know, my oldest daughters who were biological were like very terrifying as teenagers. I mean, I felt like a miracle that they made it through. You know, I mean, that was a big struggle. There's like all kinds of struggles when you're raising kids. And so for us, it didn't feel like a struggle outside of that, but that's sort of like, it also influences it, right? But even the influences of adoption as part of the struggle just felt like part of the struggle of being a family.
Right. Right.
It's sort of the influences we have.
And the unique challenges of having a family where everybody doesn't look the same. And there were things that, you know, I hadn't thought of when I was reading the book that were really enlightening to me. I think there was a moment where your older son, Adar, was having a reckoning about the color of his skin. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that you approached this was to refer to everyone in your family as having a different color skin, which I think was really beautiful.
Thank you. It was like on one level, like, right, we're all different, honey. But on another level, it was me just like, you know, like I realized, I think I wrote out, you know, also afterwards that like, when he's like, okay, wait, what color is Alba again? And I'm like, oh shit, like, I don't remember what I said for anyone else, you know? So clearly I had like really kind of missed the boat. Like I meant well, but I like in retrospect, you know, I needed to hear where that was coming from, not just the statement itself.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Is there ever a moment in the story where those differences are behind you in the rearview mirror, or are they always still in front of you?
I think they just kind of are. They just kind of exist. Like they don't exist in the like microcosm of our family. That's like, that's its own thing, you know, but I think there were times like when Adar was in the army, I think he felt awkward when we all showed up and we were mostly white with just one other Ethiopian, you know, or like when he first got to the army, a soldier very, like, not at all meanly, like very kind of cutely said, like, I don't want to be racist, but how are you Abramowitz? You know, so Adar sort of says, like, you know, maybe I'll go by my first and my middle name, you know, Adar Daniel, and that, and people won't, like in Israel, certainly ask us many, you know, ask questions. Or like one time a number of years ago, Adar and Ashira were going to the mall, and as going in, the guard looked at Adar, goes, "Ah, is this your girlfriend?" And Adar's like, "Oh my God, this is my sister." Oh.
So much that I know about your family, I know from this this beautiful book called Casting Lots, which I just read this past week, and I read it quickly because it's beautiful. It's not, you know, it's no kind of labor. You write beautifully. You also write, and I would encourage anyone who's listening now to pick up a copy of this book and read it. You also write, I think, you know, and you and I are similar this way, with incredible transparency. You know, one of the things that I like to say is that everybody, you know, everybody you see walking the street has a backstory. The only difference is that some people's we know, and some people's we don't know. And you're very, very open about sharing not only your own backstory, which of course you have ownership of, but the backstory of everybody in your family and the children, and, you know, all of the unique blessings and challenges that come with each child you have. And so I wanted to ask you about the process, the decision of writing a book like that, and talking to your family about it along the way, and what you told them you were hoping to accomplish with that level of transparency.
I mean, you're assuming that, first of all, my kids had any interest whatsoever in what I was doing every day, right? They really did not. I did say to them, I'm writing a book, it's about our family, so hey, you know, speak now or forever hold your peace, because this is your chance to read what it says. And also I just wrote, like, my instinct is to be sort of open. That's my nature. So it's easy for me. But still, when the book came out, I was like, oh my God, this is really out. Like, people are really learning these stories about us. Like, all of a sudden, like, it didn't feel real, you know, until it was out. I was like, oops.
Right. And what was it your hope to accomplish with the book? And, you know, when you go back and read it, do you feel like, yeah, that's the book I was intending to write?
I have not read it since it came out, actually. It just, I don't know. It's hard to, like, read your own stuff, I think. And like this, I'll never watch it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never watch it. I never watch almost anything that I was on or listen to it, because I just, like, I can't say the way I look, the way I sound, whatever. Like, it's just better not to know.
You look and sound great, but that's just, you know.
Yeah, so my intention with writing the book was, first of all, at the beginning, it kind of emerged. I didn't have, like, an intention about writing a book. I was more just kind of writing my thoughts. And I was like, oh, let's see where this leads. And then I wanted to write a book where I interviewed other families who had adopted. And I started doing lots and lots of interviews. And then my agent at the time said, you know, the parts that sparkle, that you're excited about, are the parts about your own family and growing your family. So why don't you focus on that? So I did, and then it kind of took some shape. But when I was writing it, I really wanted to launch Second Nurture, the organization that we will talk about later. But and I knew that if I wrote a book about adoption and my experiences and adopting and community and all of the things, then that it would give me an opportunity to plant the idea of Second Nurture, which is exactly what happened. So, like, on the book tour, I was able to, like, at all these different stops all over the country, to plant that idea, and then to finally find, you know, a place to launch.
Right. So one of the things that I do when I'm reading a book, I never have a bookmark. And so to know where I stopped, what I end up doing is I fold the top corner of one page, and then I know where to find where I was. One of the things that happened to me when I was reading this book was I would also come upon passages that I didn't want to lose. And then I would fold the top corner of the page, and then I realized, well, I have to turn the bottom corner of the page to realize where I am. And by the time I was finished, I had all of these top corners of the pages folded from what I thought were beautiful passages in the book. I want to go back and I want to read a couple of them, and I want to just ask you to talk about them a little bit. So here's one of my favorite passages, and I think this was talking right after you adopted Adar. And it says that the family that emerged was not made in our blood, but felt in our bones. Not a whole cloth, but patches and seams. Only after we stopped holding our nuclear, maybe this was about you, maybe I'm forgetting what it's about, but you'll talk about it anyway. Only after we stopped holding our nuclear family together, desperately smearing ourselves in some sort of emotional super glue, only when we let the pieces fall apart were we able to build something real. We were a mosaic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my family of origin growing up.
Yes.
Right.
And just, I mean, talk a little bit just about that process of, letting go in order to build, and how that, how that weaves into the whole adoption process.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, my parents knew they didn't want to marry each other before their wedding, right? So they started as just like holding it together, doing what you're supposed to do. And I think they were never really happy, as a couple. And so their whole kind of MO was like holding it together for the family, right? And you have to hold so tight that it's like this all the time. And so I think they were just trying so hard, and they were both, I think, so really depressed being together in this marriage that wasn't working, but with these three, at the time three, and then, Sister Jodindra, who they loved so, so much, and didn't know how to let that fall apart, right? But at a certain point, my mom was like, I've had it, that's it, and she just ended it. And it was really hard at the beginning, but then once, like, it's like they just kind of, it's like they finally had air in their lungs or something, my parents. Like they could finally like be, with outside of those constraints and that like trying to fit into that frame. And so it's sort of like, then everything else came together too, right? Sorry.
It's okay.
Mute. There we go. So I think that was, as people say, it was very healthy in the end. Like it's what they needed to do. And it enabled them to have meaningful and loving relationships and marriages, and for us to kind of like exhale a bit. And so I think that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that. Like, how did that, I think I had a real comfort with piecing together, with it not having to be kind of like lockstep. And in fact, I remember seeing a family with 6 kids. I was in rabbinical school, so 40 gazillion years ago. And they had these 6 kids, and they all the kids looked alike, looked just like the parents, who looked kind of like each other. And I remember looking at them thinking, I want a big family like that, but I don't want them to all like look alike. Like that just looks weird to me. I think I just had this comfort with like pulling together these different threads and like, making something real out of it.
Right. At the risk of, I'm trying to resist reading all of the passages in your book to you, I'm going to read one more, just because when I got to this paragraph, I think I read it a half a dozen times because I liked it so much. And then I called in my partner and I said, I need to read this paragraph to you because this is who I think we want to be. And it was, you were writing about your mom and John, who became her husband and partner. And you're right, with John, Mom was not the wife who succeeded or failed in her duties. She was a person, his partner in life. Mom directed her plays, John taught his classes. She cooked dinner, he cooked dinner, he did the dishes, she did the dishes. There was no keeping score, no resentment, blame, or complaint. Marriage was not a zero-sum game. Each of them was good at some things and less so at others, and that was okay.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that's one of the best descriptions of developing a good partnership and a good marriage that I think I've ever read. And so
Oh, so kind. Thank you.
I want to thank you for that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, their marriage was, I mean, and my dad and my stepmom also, like, this wonderful marriage, and my mom and my stepdad, just, it was just so easy, you know?
Right. Right. So maybe I'll go back to it, to another little quote at the end, but I want to keep us moving along because we want to talk about adoption. We want to talk about second nurture. So before we talk about second nurture specifically, I want to hear from you about, the adoption process, and not just your adoption process, but what you see as someone who's really, studied and understood all of the dynamics of this. What the challenges are. What are the obstacles? What are the backstories that prevent adoption from being more prevalent when there's so many children who are looking and very much needing homes and families and love?
So I think there are a few things. One is, like, we've really been trained to think of adoption as a way to make a family if the biological route's not working out. Like, that's how we think about adoption societally, I think, for the most part. And so part of what we feel like our mandate is to flip that paradigm and say, like, adoption, it certainly can be about the way you build your family, right? But let's also think about it as a way for kids to get families, not just parents to get kids, right? That there are all these kids who need to be in the context of a family. That, we know that the foster care system is the primary feeder into prison populations, into trafficking, into homelessness, into poverty. Like, that is the main feeder into all of these social ills. And so many people work for social justice on these issues. But also, let's go upstream. Let's go upstream and stop kids from falling into that, for not them having any kind of support and love that keeps them safe. So I think one obstacle is just that there are certain assumptions that it's for certain populations and not for others. And that goes also for different kinds of families, whether it's single parent families, LGBTQ families, whatever it is, like that all families, if they, can go through the home study process, right, that they're good families for kids. It's all, a good family is a good family. So I think also certain people, I think some people have assumptions that they're not going to get approved because of their sexual orientation, or because they're single, or because of their age, or something like that. And for the most part, that's really not I say for the most part because there could be certain, like, upper age limit things, but like, basically it's really, really wide open as long as you're, like, have the potential to be a good parent. I think people have the assumption that the kids are gonna, that are fostered or adopted, are going to have a lot of issues, and they are. And at the same time, when you meet kids in person who are in the foster system, you're like, oh, this is a kid. This isn't some like robot that's been programmed for horrible things that we can't undo. This is a kid, a human who has their shit and they need help with it, right? And so that's part of, like, why we have the concentric circles of support in our model, which I know we'll get to. So I think there are a lot of assumptions. And in fact, if people are interested, the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption does really great research. And you can see, like, what people's views are, beliefs are about foster care, about fostering, about adopting, and what the barriers are.
Right. Well, what should people expect just in terms of the timeline of an adoption process? How long does it take? How much does it cost? And people are worried, oh, it's going to cost me all of this. What are the biggest challenges you can expect to run into?
Right. So if you're looking for domestic infant adoption, which is the case where, you know, infant is born and, you know, the bio mom has chosen a family, that's going to cost you upwards of $25,000-$30,000, right? But there are like 100 people for every one of those babies born, right? On the other hand, the kids in foster care who may be a part of a sibling group, maybe you're a little older, maybe you were born exposed, maybe there's lots of different possibilities. It's not only free to foster and adopt the kids, but you're also given a stipend for their whole lives and medical insurance and everything that the child needs. You'll be covered for that in raising that child. So you even get money to take this on. And you're not going to get rich off of it, but it's going to help you to be able to make ends meet and not have that extra financial stress when you foster or adopt from foster care. And it can happen it's a lot of it's in the hands of the potential parents. So like if you like are really organized and diligent and you push it forward, you could like adopt from foster care in like 6 months or so. A lot of people, it takes anywhere from 6 months to like 18 months, depending if you can get to all the classes in a row. Maybe you can't because of work or travel or whatever, like, you know, there are things that get in the way of getting through it. But you can do it quite quickly. And a lot of the, probably almost all of the agencies now are doing a lot of it online. So you can't do everything online, but you can do a lot online so that the restrictions around COVID don't have to prevent you from moving forward in terms of fostering and adopting. And in terms of what you can expect, who knows? Like, you know, like if you're pregnant, like, and you're gonna get the kid and you're like, so what can I expect? I don't know what you can expect. Who knows? Like, right. You know, they're just all so different and like kind of nuts in their own ways and have their own struggles and their own, you know, life can be hard.
Right. I'm thinking about, you know, this process of saving and changing a life that adoption is, through the lens a little bit of the process that I went through, you know, a year ago to be an organ donor. And in my process of being an organ donor, not only didn't I have a choice of who was going to receive my organ, but I didn't want to know before. But this is a very different process where you get to choose and say, you know, to some extent, I want to adopt a child from another country. I want to adopt a child next door. I want to adopt a child who's a baby. I want to adopt a child who's 15 years old. You know, tell me not only from your personal perspective, but from the perspective of a rabbi, of someone who's created a nonprofit around adoption, you know, about that decision and what you would suggest to someone who wants to think about that as just kind of, you know, guideposts in terms of their own decision-making process.
Right. So I think one important thing in thinking about the decision-making process is to think about what orients you in the world, right? So we're Jewish, we're very Jewish, you know, like, and so a lot of our kind of guideposts were holidays and we're, you know, like that, we had decided on the name Adar. And so Yosef had said, okay, he's gonna be whatever kids brought into that orphanage on Purim is our kid. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yep, that's our kid. And so I said, okay, like, why not just go with, like, to orient yourself in a way that's meaningful to you, that like, that sort of touches your soul, that doesn't feel random, even if it is, right? So like, that's what we did. And then when Purim came around, we called the orphanage and the woman who we spoke to, Colleen, who worked there, was wonderful. We're like, okay, Colleen, what kid was brought in today? She's like, no, there were no kids brought in today. And Yosef was on the phone with her. She's like, come on, of course there was. I know there was. This was our plan for months. Like, there's a kid who was brought in today. And she's, no, nobody was brought in today. And he's like, think, are you sure? And she goes, fine, there was, but we're not supposed to mention it yet because he hasn't been processed, seen by the doctor, whatever it was. And Yosef said, okay, that's our kid. So that was Adar.
Yeah, the world just puts these things together for us. You know, I think we're always writing these stories and we're looking for how they're going to end. And I think the world always, often creates some kind of, oh, that's the ending that I was looking for
Yeah,
this story.
it often can feel that way, I feel like we had the chutzpah to change the trajectory of this child's life, of this whole like history, this like the DNA history that he came from. We just completely had the nerve to come in and swoop it up. And, it was in some ways incredibly selfish because he's just our greatest joy,
Right. Right. I'm wondering if demographic changes, if the trend for many folks to wait longer to have children, what effect that has on the adoption world, and are folks, more likely, for example, to say, you know what, I decided not to have a child until I'm in my mid-40s. I'm going to adopt a 15-year-old because I don't want that child to be, I don't want to be 70 when that child's in college. And have you seen, the demographic changes in the world have had any effect when it comes to trends, when it comes to adoption?
Yeah, I think they really do. I mean, certainly if you look at American Jews, right? American Jews tend to marry much later, especially really in the more liberal streams. And because of that, Jews adopt at twice the national rate, about 4% as opposed to 2%. So it's, just adopt in general. It could be domestic, it could be international, it could be foster, but
right.
Adopt in general. And it's largely because we tend to wait longer to get married and start to have kids because we're in school, graduate school, whatever it is. But
right. So let's talk about second nurture. It occurs to me that one of the things that makes the two of us alike is that we have an experience and then we want to build an infrastructure so everybody can have that experience. And so tell me about, that inspiration, why you were inspired to create, and then what you created.
So at a certain point, a friend I've had since we were infants, who also weirdly from Manchester, New Hampshire, also became a rabbi, Rabbi David Novak. But he at one point, he just looked at me and he goes, Suze, you got to be an adoption rabbi. That's your calling is adoption, and you're a rabbi. So make it your rabbinate. And I was like, oh yeah, like why am I trying to fit myself into what's out there when I have a passion and I can bring my rabbinate to that? And so I just started thinking more and more about it. And that sort of, is while I was first writing something that led to the book. And then I had this idea for Second Nurture, which sort of came to me as applying for a fellowship at the Mandela Institute. And as I was writing the application, this whole vision just kind of took form, that I wanted to create these pods of support for people to adopt kids who are waiting, whether that means they're part of sibling groups or that they have special needs or that they're older, whatever it might be, that we can get kids into families because the families have support and that cohort of families has, a broader support among the community. And because I was applying for this fellowship and I, wanted to get money to develop this idea for a year, I finally formulated the idea.
Right. And so talk a little bit about the premise of Second Nurture and then what it actually looks like put into action.
Sure. So Second Nurture, the idea of Second Nurture is, like I said, that we partner with communities to help those communities to prioritize and support foster care and adoption among their membership. Oh, we're launching a new site. I'm going to send it to you after.
We're going to take
the old site.
So the site that we just showed you, everybody, it's going to look so much better.
So much better, like in 5 minutes. I'll send it to you, David, and that would be great if you shared it with us.
That's great. We should have scheduled this for 5 minutes from now, and then it could have been up.
Then it would be ready. It's so close. It's really great. If I do say so myself, I love it. And it's the old one, sort of talked about what we do, but we didn't have the communities yet in action. So, so the idea is that we partner with these communities. We help them to prioritize foster care and adoption and to support people who do it. So that means that we create a cohort of people who are fostering and adopting. So in our first community, which is the Wilshire Boulevard Temple in LA, we have a cohort of almost 20 families. I think 14 of them now have kids home from foster care, and 6 or 7 of them have finalized adoptions, and the others are mostly on a track for adoption. Although there are also families that do emergency shelter and have like different kids every, for a period of a few weeks to a couple of months, when a kid just needs a place to be while things are figured out for him or for her, for them. So, and at the same time, the community figures out how they can be supportive. So there have been so many ways that the families have reached out and said, oh, we need support. So one family called and said, we really need, we're noticing that the foster kids have language delays. And so there was someone from the community who is a not a neurosurgeon, like a neuro PhD doctor, who knows all this stuff. And she volunteered, and then she ended up volunteering with more families because they heard about her, and she was amazing. And then she herself said, I think I'm interested in fostering a teenager maybe, and is starting to look into it, right? So it kind of spreads that way. So she came and she was so helpful to the families. And another family live in a tiny house in LA, and when their son came home from foster care, the dad lost his home office. So we put out word, and within 24 hours we had 3 different offers for a free office space, and he worked there for 2 years until Corona kind of put an end to that for now. But free office space because they couldn't afford from different office, and he lost it to foster care. So because we're a supportive community, so there have been so many examples of things like that that have been so beautiful. And of course, stuff being shared, and it's been good. And so the community, the cohort has a monthly bagel brunch where they can share what's happening with them and laugh together and have shorthand for so much that's so hard to explain to people who aren't in that world. And Talia, who's our director of programs in LA County, she's been incredible in like helping to troubleshoot for things that have come up that are difficulties, like so that the families aren't by themselves trying to deal with all of this stuff. So that's what we're doing. And then we got some funding to expand in LA County, and we went to 10 more synagogues. We're focusing first on synagogues, but it's not meant for just Jewish communities. To figure like, let's get 1 or 2 more communities now that we have a little, more bandwidth. And 8 of the 10 said yes and are amazing. And so now we've got 2 more cohorts and 2 of those communities growing, and we don't have the bandwidth to really do it with all 8. So we're taking it slow, but got 2 more cohorts growing, and the bagel brunch is starting, and it's very exciting.
Right. And for folks who are not in Los Angeles, are there resources? Is there a replicable model that you're looking at creating so that communities can be constructing their own community of support?
Yeah, so that's something that's, on our wish list. That we want to be able to create some sort of, not exactly turnkey, but some sort of model that's replicable with the right support, so that we are imagining a second nurture kind of being more umbrella, and then having all these different communities all over the US who are putting it in action, but with local second nurture staff, so that we're not doing it by ourselves anymore, because that's obviously not sustainable. So that's what we're aiming for, down the line when we can.
Right. What's the biggest thing you've learned during the construction process? Was there a big assumption that you had to correct?
Yeah. So I'm sure there are lots. One of them is like, we sort of, when we were imagining it, we were like, oh, and the cohort will go through the process together, step by step, and they'll be, together all along the route to getting their kids. And you're like, you learn very quickly that that's not going to happen. People go at their own pace. We've got one family who's been in the cohort for 2 years, and they just now started the foster process. They described themselves as foster curious, right? They were like, and it took them a long time to get to the point, which is good. That's how it should be, right? They kept coming to the bagel brunches. They kept being such a beautiful part of the cohort, but they weren't ready to start themselves until now. You know, so like we learned very quickly that we're not going to get everybody into lockstep to go through all of like, the stages together, that everyone's got to do it at their own pace. And that's also true in terms of the overall process, that some communities are going to, like, we have educational materials, lots and lots of educational materials. They're going to introduce those, but they're not quite going to form a cohort. They're going to form a cohort, but they're not going to really be able to like integrate the educational resources yet. Like there are so many different ways of going about it that, you know, are much more true to the essence of that place than to what we imagined, which is exactly as it should be.
Right. So, you know, we gave the title to this webinar about fostering family in a fractured world. We've talked a lot about fostering family. We haven't talked a lot about fractured world. I want to get that to that in a moment. Before we do, I want to encourage anyone who's listening, if you have a question for Susan, to type it into the chat feature, into the Zoom chat, or if you want to raise your virtual hand. If you raise your virtual hand, I might actually be able to bring you live into the conversation. If I bring you live into the conversation, just know if you have your camera on and you're wearing your pajamas, because it's still the morning, that the whole world might see you in your pajamas. But we want to encourage you, if you have questions, either to raise your hand or to type them in. And Susan, I do want to get to the fractured world. This has been a surreal year so far, between COVID-19 and you know, issues of social injustice. A lot of things have risen to the surface this year, you know, beyond things that have you know, enveloped us, like COVID-19. Like one of the things we've found in our community is all of a sudden we know a lot more about food insecurity in our community. It's not that it didn't exist, it's just risen to the surface. I would say it's the same thing about racial injustice and societal differences. And you know, while those issues are very much in the forefront in the US right now, let's not pretend that there's not societal differences that are great issues in Israel, where you are as well. And so, you know, talk about those challenges when it comes to building family, both through the lens of your family, how you handle those issues of societal differences in your family and the questions your sons might ask you, and why it makes adoption even more important.
Right. So a couple things. One is, it's a very big question. I'll start in the US in terms of foster care and adoption. Is we just formed a subcommittee of our board about racial, you know, anti-racism work, and what is our role in all that as a foster and adoption agency when we know that kids of color are disproportionately taken out of their families, either for cause, but the situation, like the systemic racism has led to that, right? Or really not for cause, but because of the racism in the system. And so like, how do we keep not just an awareness of that, but how do we behave in such a way that we're not participating in that we're not strengthening that, but that we're in our own way, in terms of our own work, that we're trying to dismantle that so that all families of origin have as good a shot as possible at raising their kids. So, I mean, we do foster care and adoption. We're not wishing for more kids to be available for foster care and adoption. We're doing it because it's a necessity that kids are in families. But better is if we're able to figure out a society in which families of origin are not undermined, right? And that the only kids who are removed, it's out of just, there is no other way because of the makeup of that family or whatever happened to them, but nothing that's like socially created, right? So that's a really big question. It's something that weighs on us a lot. In terms of what was another?
About your own family. Talk a little bit about your own family, and you know, as a mother of you know, an integrated, very diverse family.
Right.
You know, the questions you hear from your sons, and how you feel as a mother.
Well, it's interesting because here it would feel very natural to be like, yes, like of these black sons and, you know, racism in Israel and police shootings of Ethiopians and all this stuff. But it actually doesn't kind of dovetail like that for me and my family because first of all, our 18-year-old has zero connection with anything political or whatever outside. His world is Israel, you know, that's it. Our older son, who's very knowledgeable and reads a ton and is really learning a lot, he's a little farther right than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't see, like, we're really involved in like anti-Black racism, you know, anti-Ethiopian Jewish racism here, you know, which is actually like raising Black kids in Israel, I think feels way safer than raising Black kids in America. That even though we have a problem, it has to be addressed. It's not like that proportionally big, right? It's real. I'm not trying to minimize it, but it's not the same thing. I mean, you know, I see mothers of Black kids posting how terrified they are for their kids to go outside. I do not feel that.
Right.
I do not feel that at all. So our situation is Adar is a little more like right wing, a little more conservative in that way. And also here it's different because, you know, who votes Bibi and right of Bibi? It's brown and Black people here. Not only, I mean, certainly there are Ashkenazi Jews who are voting right, and the settlements are largely Ashkenazi Jews. But there are not a whole lot of, for example, Meretz, my party supporters, who are from Arab countries, who are Jews from Arab countries, or Jews from African countries, right? And even like I'm very involved in asylum seeker work, and a lot of asylum seekers, like if Bibi knew how they would vote, he'd give them citizenship tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Really right wing and really negative toward our neighbors, right, you know, in this region. And you and I both know we both have that kibbutz keturah, arava, you know, connection of like peace building, you know, between Arabs, Christians, and Jews, and in the region. It's not largely shared, and I think it comes as a shock to people that. As my friend Dani Abebe would say, who's an Ethiopian Jewish journalist here, is like, you know, it's kind of white privilege to be left wing in Israel.
So the great thing for me about nobody asking questions is it means I can ask more. Interested in what, if any, effect COVID-19 has had on the adoption process. You know, I know it's one thing, for example, courthouses closed down when COVID-19. So just in terms of process, in terms of interaction, has COVID-19 just slowed down the adoption process?
So here's the part where I start crying. So just don't be embarrassed for me. So COVID-19 impact on the foster care system on kids has been really dire, because there's an article actually, then the headline was, the emergency lines are eerily silent. So what that means is that mandatory reporters are not seeing kids. So kids who are in really at-risk families, who are in vulnerable, who are in families where there's domestic violence. This goes also for women in domestic violence situations, and certainly for children in domestic violence situations. It's getting worse. The pressures on the adults in the household are getting greater, and certainly the abuse isn't stopping, but no teachers, no clergy, no social workers are seeing the kids, certainly not on a regular basis. And so the expectation is that at this point, when restrictions do ease and when it is safe to become more public again, that we're going to have huge influxes of kids into the system. So right now it's like unthinkable to think about what's happening with the kids, with nobody being able from the outside being able to watch. And at some point, we're going to have this huge influx. So what a lot of organizations are doing, certainly the foster family associations that we work with, which are sort of subcontracted by the Department of Social Services, and what the Department of Social Services, certainly LA County is doing a lot of stuff online. And we're working really hard with our partners to get as many potential foster parents into the pipeline as possible, so that when there is an influx of kids, we will have families who are prepared to maybe foster while that family can get back on track, or to foster to adopt if that's what's needed, but to get the kids into safe spaces while the family can get help, or just to get them into a new permanent family, whatever's needed for that child. And there's going to be such an influx that we need to get people into that pipeline. And you know, we're all these organizations are doing our parts to do it. In terms of the courts, yeah, so like for a lot of families, they're at the very end, they need like the TPR, the termination of parental rights about the bio families, and they need the finalization of the adoption, and those things often aren't happening. But there are some courts in terms of a family court that are really trying to do more and more by Zoom, so that families aren't left in this kind of limbo. And you can imagine, like, this is a time of such, you know, instability for all of us. I mean, so many people are having anxiety about this. Can you imagine being a child in foster care with no one telling you, or in a group home, or in an abusive home where nobody's telling you, like, I got you, you know, I got you. You're going to be okay. I got you. Nobody's saying this to them, right? Could be in that kind of unstable situation, or to be a Black kid, just, you know, who, with all of this, like police violence, where like the systems can't be trusted, where you feel unsafe all the time. Plus there's COVID-19, and there's no one saying, honey, I got you. I got your back. You know, and so that's what we're trying to do, is create families who are going to say, like, I got you, honey. I got you. You're okay. And a community who's going to say to all of those families, I know this is really hard, and we got you. So how do we create belonging within belonging, so that these kids someone's got their back?
So I want us to smile before we end our conversation, which is quickly closing. Of the various loves that you and I share in common, when I got to chapter 3 of your book, and I read that the title is called I Got Love, I knew exactly what it was talking about.
I know. You're the only person who knows.
Which is a song that's sung by Melba Moore in a musical that you and I both love, that is called Pearly, which everybody should see, which is the musicalization of Pearly Victorious by Ozzie Davis.
Yeah.
One of the things that occurs to me, you know, there's so many things that make a lot of people so different, and then we realize how similar we are in so many ways. And you have a blended family that's Jewish, and that you know, is white and Black, and Pearly is very much a story of the Black community in the US. You shared with me the greatest story that, if you're comfortable sharing it, has to do with a very meaningful sermon that the Reverend Pearly gives at the end of that musical at the funeral of Captain Conchapee.
That's right. Wow, you like even got all the characters' names down. So, well, it's funny because this is the same friend who I've known since the day I was born. David it's that same person who's now also a rabbi, right? I was born when he was 6 months old, and he says his first 6 months were the best. That's another story. It was his bar mitzvah, and his dad had died when he was 10. And so my dad was asked to give him a blessing at his bar mitzvah in Manchester, New Hampshire. So my dad takes this soliloquy from Pearly that starts, today I find in being Black a thing of beauty. And my dad changes Black to Jewish in this whole beautiful speech and gives it. And people were crying. It was so beautiful. And it was just really from Pearly.
Love it. So I do have a question from Linda asks, if your own children eventually choose to adopt, what would your best advice be to them?
Oh, that's such a great question. So, well, already our oldest, who's 27, she does not want biological kids at all. I would say, and they all say that they want to adopt as definitely. So I love that, and it's a really good question. So I think I would say to them, like, be cognizant of what really smart people say about adoption, the experts out there, because I was very much like, you just need love and everything will be fine, and they're Jewish and that's all they need to know. And they're, I kind of had this attitude, which I think it didn't work out horribly. I think in some ways it worked out, I think, pretty well for our older son, but I think for our younger son, it really didn't. I think he really needed for us to say, here's your story, here are the threads of it, here's how it came together. And I think also actually our older one really needed it too. There was this very wise person, a neighbor of ours, who sat with Adar and when he was becoming bar mitzvah and made like this art of all the places he's lived and come from. And it was really meaningful for him. And so I think I would say to my kids, like, don't be so smug like your mother was smug, really, like, there's such great stuff out there, like, entertain it, look at it, see what fits with you and what doesn't, but like, be more open to it, where I was just more like, it's just love that we need. And I was kind of blind to things I think would have been really, really useful for both of my boys.
So I want to cite one more passage, short passage from your book as we wrap up that really resonated with me. In fact, as a parent who helped to co-raise two transgender stepchildren, sometimes I've been asked to speak or teach about Judaism and gender. And one of the things I've talked about is that, in Bereshit, in Genesis, there's two binaries that God has talked about separating. One is about separating day and night, and one is about separating male from female. And when it comes to day and night, that there's actually just one instance in every 24-hour period that it's all day or it's all night. There's midnight,
and there's
amazing. Noon, and
that's amazing.
Everything else is some integration of the two. And in fact, the two most beautiful times of day are dusk and dawn, that are the perfect integration of day and night. And so you have a passage in the book where you wrote, sometimes the same moment holds both day and night. And I thought that was such just a beautiful message for right now when we're dealing with such challenge, but there's such beauty that we can build and create at the same time.
Thank you for sharing that, teaching with me. That is incredible. That's right. There's only two moments that are like just one or just the other. Wow. Thank you.
And thank you for sharing our story, because I think your story is very much about the integration of those two. I was thinking this morning about, those things that we choose to make and those things that just get made for us. And sometimes the best we can do is just, we make do, or we try to make things better, or sometimes we just make the best of a situation. And in fact, making the best of a situation is, in fact, in this case, less than making something better. But we take what we have and we do what we can with it to make the world a better place. And so I want to thank you both for sharing your story, sharing your book with the world, and building an infrastructure that enables other people to repair the world as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Sharing.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you to those who listen. I want to encourage you to go to Second Nurture's new and improved website.
I'll send it to David when it's ready, very soon.
Okay. So just Google Second Nurture, go online and look up Casting Lots and buy a new copy of it. And then encourage others to read it as well. Susan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, David.
And enjoy your evening with your beautiful family. Be well and stay healthy.
Thank you. You too. Amen.
Take care. Bye-bye.